Today we're going to be interviewing Julian Delany, the General Manager of news.com.au. We're going to be chatting to him about his role in the startup Weather Active. Come on in.
Julian Delany is a journalist and entrepreneur. Prior to joining news.com.au, he worked for the Weather Channel on Foxtel. During this time, he expanded and defined the 24-hour news coverage of weather around Australia by creating and launching Weather Active.
So news.com.au is a digital-only news source, and as a result of that, the way in which we pull that site together each day requires quite a mix of people, and as a result, quite a mix of skill sets. So my job is to corral and make sure everybody is thinking about not only the end goal, which is to be, for us, the biggest news site in the country. It's also trying to make sure that all those different departments who you've met, marketing, sales, editorial, product, production, all of those different departments are together as one. And that's, I think, the definition of being a general manager. You're not necessarily the knowledge, you don't know everything about all of those areas. You need to trust in the people that you've got running those departments to be telling you their problems and their solutions and their wins and their losses each day. So my job is to make sure that news.com.au as a brand is serving up news information in a way in which our consumers expect it to be done. But behind the scenes, it's making sure that all of those departments are, in inverted, I suppose, shaking hands. At the same time, making sure all of our people are happy and know what's required of them every day. It's not that different to my previous role over at Foxtel. There's a similar thing, only that because news.com.au is just a digital news source, at Foxtel I was running a television channel, and television is quite different in the way in which you need to bring the news to life. So I would say that the main difference is that bringing a TV channel to life is, yes, it is more complicated, but it requires a different skill set because you're talking about broadcast. And in broadcast you have cameras, you have producers, you have presenters, and you have a different, and it was specifically about weather, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more, but weather is a very complicated beast. News.com.au is about all news. So for example, yesterday we had a story about Sydney's weather. That was one part of what we offered to consumers yesterday. It wasn't the only thing we spoke about or wrote about. So slightly different because TV is more complicated behind the scenes, but the principles of getting the news to a consumer are the same. Weather Active still is, I was about to say was, but it's still live, is instant weather information for a consumer's local location. It's weather down to somebody's postcode. And what it is solving is two things. It's solving a consumer problem of what information is relevant to me, because it is weather for that person's postcode, not weather for that person's state or country or anywhere else. So I think it's actually solving a problem, an issue of time, because everyone's got very little time in their own days. So Weather Active was literally, if you went to the Weather Channel, you pressed a button on your remote control, that red button would initiate in the broadcast the weather for your location. So let's say you live in Sydney and your postcode is 2000. The weather just for that postcode would come up. And it wasn't necessarily, it was quite revolutionary at the time. It was was the first of its kind. I mean, I think in this day and age we take instant information for granted. But if you go back 10 years or so, when the internet was in its infancy and the like, and the ability to personalise information for somebody was a lot more difficult, Weather Active was a product that enabled people to get that personalised information specifically for weather very fast and very quickly. Yeah, that's a really good question because building anything in media requires a lot of different skill sets. Specifically for Weather Active, believe it or not, and it's an obvious thing to say, but one of the main resources were the meteorologists, because the credibility of Weather Active was down to how how accurate the information was within the service that was provided onto someone's television screen. So first of all, I had to draw on meteorologist skills to say, well, what weather information is actually the most important to you as a meteorologist? Then I would have to say, okay, if that's the most important information, how am I going to get that information out of a database? So then I had to draw on engineers' skill set to say, okay, I've got to get that weather for that postcode instantly. So I had to draw on engineers. Then I had to draw on designers' skills, because whilst it's easy to say, a meteorologist to say, okay, I need that sort of weather, engineers then say, I can give you that weather, then how does it look on screen? So then I've got to draw on the skill set of designers. And then after that, I've actually then got to draw on the skill set of marketers, because marketers then need to say to our consumers, well, this is what this particular program is all about, this is what it looks like, these are the benefits that it's going to do and the like. So everything right back from meteorologists, engineers, designers, marketers, presenters on screen, and also you have to have the support of management, because to build anything like this, you've got to invest money. And so you have to have the support of the management of your company to make sure this stuff can actually be built. It doesn't just get built out of thin air. And I'm going to try and explain this as simply as I can. Weather active, whenever you're putting a broadcast to air or the like, you need something called bandwidth. And weather active required a lot of bandwidth to actually be initiated through a television. And that bandwidth had a big impact on what sort of product we could actually provide. And so we had a limited amount of bandwidth. Even though we wanted to do everything within this weather active application, we had to draw it right back to say what are the most pertinent details to give to a consumer. And so the challenge was actually choosing which type of weather information we would serve up to a consumer to make sure they felt satisfied with that local weather information. So a technical issue of bandwidth was driving what we could end up doing for the consumer in the end. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a good question. It's a personal question, isn't it, with regards to how you feel. I think there was a feeling of satisfaction because of the challenges that were around it. But I think the feeling was also that we brought a team together to make this come to life. And again, I think going right back to your initial question around, well, what's my job entail of bringing all these different groups together, it was exactly the same with bringing Weather Active to life. That sense of satisfaction of making sure that everyone was in sync, trying to deliver the end product, and then getting great feedback from consumers once it's launched. I suppose the emotion is of satisfaction. That was the good part about doing it. Absolutely. If you can't do, I couldn't personally build that website on my own, even if I knew how to write code, even if I knew how to design, even if I knew what a database was capable of doing. If you're not collaborating not only with your internal partners and your external partners, some of which you've mentioned there, there's no way that something as complicated as any website can actually come to life. Again, I think in this day and age, people take for granted what's possible in the digital age. But behind the scenes, there's lots of work that takes place. And so if that collaboration isn't evident, and if end goals aren't clear and everyone isn't trying to do something that's best for the consumer, then something as complicated as that just isn't going to come off. Collaboration is key, but I would emphasise the point that collaboration needs to be with your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders. As long as like bringing those external stakeholders in to make them feel part of your team, make them feel like they are working for your brand. And it's something that I do even now here at news.com.au. In fact, I do a lot of it. I thought about this question a lot, and I think for young people or just anyone doing a startup, young, old, or it doesn't really matter the age, is that you've got to do the work on detail. You've really got to know, there's two things. First thing, you've got to work on what exactly you're trying to do, and to do that, you've got to go through the detail. I think as a result of going through the detail, that and then enables you to summarise exactly what problem you're trying to solve. If you're not trying to solve a problem, then I think it's more difficult for you to get additional funding to fund your startup if it's not clearly articulated what the problem is you're trying to solve. I think if you're going to go in and seek funding from management and the like, or from other companies, it has to be very clear and concise how you're going to approach that. But way back in that process is somebody really going through the detail and knowing how to answer pretty much any question on the startup or product or company that you're actually going to launch. So detail, summary, solve a problem. If you can do those three things, in what order I'm not quite sure at this very moment, probably thinking about what problem you're trying to solve, then think how you're going to do the detail around solving that problem, and then being able to summarise that clearly and concisely, you're more of a chance to be able to get that idea off the ground. Because people will pay for someone to solve their problems.
Yeah.
And that can be in media, it can be in banking, it can be in technology, it can be in retail, it can be in any industry at all. So that would be my advice. I'm not sure whether it's correct, but that would be my view on it, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Well, you've given me very interesting answers to these questions.
Great.
So once again, thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. I hope it helps anyone who's watching.